Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Vernon Salon series here in the East Bay, California. It's going to be a really interesting and unique experience this evening. We have composer and performer Anne Hege, who actually lives kind of up the hill for me here, and book artist Camden, and I'm going to read you a little bit about their bios in a bit, Camden M. Richards and Anne Hege. But first, just a little bit about the series if you're new to the Vernon Salon series. I founded this back in January of 2016, so it's been going for over 5 years. And about 1 year ago, when we all weren't able to gather in person, we went to a streaming format and have been doing these over YouTube ever since. If you have any friends or family that can't tune in tonight for any reason, the video will actually be archived on YouTube, so they can go back later and watch the video. On the bottom of your screen, you should see a couple little links for payment options this evening, and your any donation that you choose to give will help support the artist this evening and help ensure the continuation of this series as well. So as I said, we have two really wonderful performers tonight, and I'm going to read you a little bit about them so you get an idea before we start. First is Anne Hege. We have California composer Anne Hege will present new works composed for her tape machine, a live looping instrument created to accompany artist's book, Water Calling, by book artist Camden Richards and printmaker Deborah Sibony. Anne will weave together live and pre-recorded excerpts of the soundtrack with an online preview of the book. Through a live conversation with collaborator Camden Richards, they will discuss the power of water and its beautiful and complex interplay in our lives. Storytelling is at the center of Camden M. Richards' work, and as a trained graphic designer, design and typography figure heavily into her methods and artistic processes. She makes a variety of artist books, fine prints, cards, and other letterpress printed ephemera, all of which engage others to connect in a deeper way with themselves and their community. Liminal Press Bindery is the studio of Camden M. Richards, located in the Bay Area of Northern California. So if you are tuning in on YouTube, you should see a little, I don't know if this is on the right side or this is on the right side of your screen, a little chat feature. So I'll be monitoring the chat feature throughout the evening, and Anne and Camden have kindly agreed to stay on a little bit after their performance to answer any questions that you might have for them. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to them. Let me give a chance for them to unmute themselves and get their videos going. And please welcome Anne and Camden.
Inside these waters are stories, stories waiting to be told, unfinished, telling themselves, never ending. Inside these waters are stories, stories waiting to be told. Inside these waters are stories, stories waiting to be told. Inside these waters are stories, stories waiting to be told. Inside these waters are stories, stories waiting to be told. Inside these waters are stories,
Inside these waters are stories waiting to be told. Inside these waters, inside these waters are stories waiting to be told, stories waiting to be told, stories waiting to be She calls to us. She calls to us. Our voice one within our own. She calls to us. She calls to us. She calls to us. Our voice one within our own. Our world is water. We are water. Our world is water. We are water. Our world is water. We are water. We are water. We
Water is a song, a poem, alive. Water hangs heavily in the air in New Orleans, where I run with another mother through streets we do not know well. But there is a familiarity in the humidity that collects on my eyelashes, the sheen on my skin. We are running upon alluvial grounds, deposited here by waters seeking freedom, rivers running toward the ocean, but trapped beneath concrete roads, behind levees that are no match for her power and force. She keeps trying to rise, escape. She will prevail, I think. She always does.
In this
This year, permitting for the removal of 4 hydropower dams in the middle reach of the Klamath River has begun. Doing so will open up 400 miles of historic salmon habitat that was cut off by the dams, restoring ecosystems and the river to its natural state. Go slowly and listen to those and that which came before. If you listen, she will speak to you. It is a crisp, clear morning after a night of steady rain. Look, Mama, she says. The watered droplets are like tiny lights floating in the tree branches. As dusk settles, my daughter luxuriates like a mermaid in the bathtub, twirling her body about, daydreaming, floating, free. After dinner, I watch my mother from across the kitchen. She has a way of tapping her wet hands on the edge of the sink to shake them dry, scattering droplets back into the basin. I realize that I have adopted her movements, too busy to fully dry my hands, letting a fragile dampness trail along the surfaces of my life. Later that night, my cousin emails me, asking if I am familiar with Tat Twam Asi. I am you, and you are me. We are one.
Salt, water, salt, salt, water, salt, 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 water, 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 salt, water, salt, salt, water, salt, salt, water, salt, water, salt, water, salt, 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 water, salt, water, salt, water's twin powers, giver and taker of light, swirl water so salt, water salt. An ancient song singing us forth to the depths. An ancient song singing us forth to the depths. An ancient song singing us forth into the depths. Water is our beginning, water our end, and everything. Water so salt. Water is our beginning, our end, and everything. Water is our beginning, our end, and everything. What is our beginning, our end, and everything in between, everything in between, everything in between, everything in between. Salt water, salt water, salt water.
Inside these waters are stories, stories waiting to be told, unfinished, telling themselves, never ending.
So I'm going to put it through. I'll just put it through. Hello. So we are finished with the performance part, and now Camden and I are going to have a conversation around how we made this project together and kind of the path of creating an artist book with a soundtrack. And so we're going to sit here together. Both vaccinated. We're going to be careful. Great. So Camden, I wanted to start by asking you some questions about, a lot of people asked me when I was working on this, well, what is an artist book? And some real questions around and what defines something as an artist book, and what does that mean? Yeah.
Sure. There are so many things to say about artist books and about our conversation in general. So I will be honest that I brought notes because I didn't want to forget anything. But in terms of artist books, simply defined, it's the book is the art object, and so the book is the medium. So if you think about like the painter uses canvas or a sculptor uses marble, a book artist uses the book. And artist book can range from codex structures, so your typical book that you would read before you go to bed or that you see in the bookstore, to scrolls, to objects that are collected in a box. So they really have a wide variety of what we define as artist books. And they're often created in small editions or sometimes even one of a kind. So that's how, some of the basic ways that you could begin to identify what the difference is between just a regular book and an artist's book. But most importantly, and what draws me to the medium the most, is that they, there are works that you are meant to interact with, to touch, to hold, to manipulate. And that is what really draws me to the medium and is especially important in my work. It's not, the books that I make are not something that you just sit and look at, or like, hanging on a wall. It's something they force you to interact with them, to lift panels, to navigate word and image as you're interacting with the book. They're tangible objects and experiential objects. And so, that's what draws me to the medium, or that's what an artist book is what your question was. And also the final thing, is that they create this liminal space for the reader when they are in it, and similar for me to the way that one might experience music. When you're listening to it, it transports you to this kind of liminal space.
Well, that leads right into the second question that I was thinking about, was how did you think about contacting me about music, and how did you think about adding music? Because when I first looked into this project and I did some research on artist books with soundtracks, there were very few. And so why a soundtrack for this project? Because you have other books, and this is the first one with the soundtrack, right?
Yeah. So that kind of, to answer that question, I have to go a little bit back to explain the idea behind the book in general, or what inspired it. And so I'll try to do that somewhat succinctly. So basically, I've wanted to make a book about water for a long time, and this book, it was my kind of love story to water, love letter to water. I had this desire to explore and deepen my own relationship with water, and to practice more of a sacred reciprocity. I think those of us who are lucky enough to live in areas, neighborhoods that are served by municipal utilities, that we have water piped into our homes, can take for granted where that water comes from, how easily it comes to us. And so I just really wanted to explore my own relationship with water through the book, and also to inspire other people to care more about where their water comes from, and to explore their relationships with water, and hopefully learn to practice that sacred reciprocity, appreciating it more deeply. And so that's kind of what struck the idea for the book. And I, and that's been a number of years that I was tossing that around. And then in 2019, I got serious about envisioning the book. And around that time, Anne and I have children that go to the same school. And so I became aware of your work and also and I desire to reach out to other mother artists as a self-preservation method, because it's not, as we know, not easy to be a working artist and mother simultaneously. And so we started going on some walks and talking about our different mediums that we worked in, and I realized that Anne had done that you had done some really interdisciplinary work with your music, and which got me thinking about, okay, this water book, and is this a place to draw music in? And so I researched, like you mentioned, different artist books and water, and of course there are artist books that utilize sound as part of their form and function. So the bindings make noise, or there's strings that run through them, so that when you turn the pages, a sound is played or emitted. There's artist books that use musical scores as text, and then concrete poetry, and then I started researching sound artists. So John Cage and incorporating music and text and three-dimensional objects in his work. And so, this was all kind of percolating. And then I came across this passage where John Cage was talking about, if I remember correctly, a conversation that he was having with Marcel Duchamp about, Duchamp believed that the observer completes the work of art. And so then John Cage said, well, it's the same with my, my works of musical art. The listener completes the work. And so I love this, and I felt like that, in terms of book arts, was really a way to enrich the reader's experience of the book by bringing them in also through sound. And there was a sound art exhibition at the Sculpture Center in New York City in 1983, and art historian Don Goddard wrote about it, and he, in his review, he said, hearing is another form of seeing. And so that was just like, yes, this is, starting to, all these pieces, synapses kind of, connecting. And then, like you said, when I started to research specifically artist books about the natural environment that utilize music, I am sure there are some, but I was not able to find any in my research, or at least not utilizing music in the interactive way that I was starting to envision with you. And so I guess it was in April, in my notes, when I went back to look at my emails, April and May of 2019, we went on a series of walks, late at night after all the kids were in bed, and started talking about what a cross media kind of collaboration would entail. And we, kept coming back to this, idea of how music could play a really powerful role in helping readers ground themselves in space and time within the book, and then to help them, synthesize this voice of water, which we were trying to figure out what that meant to us, and, to create a truly immersive experience within the book. And so one of the many, books that the poetry that I'm dipping in and out to is Gary Snyder. And in the Mountains and Rivers Without End, he writes, all art and song is sacred to the real as such. And so that I was just like, yes, music. And so that's the long and short of kind of, how we got. How it gave me the idea.
It's been such an interesting journey, because I feel like, we began with some really different ideas. I remember I invited Camden, this was probably in 2019, to come to my studio and watch me play the tape machine. And, she was looking at it and she's like, oh, well, how could we build this into the book? So I was thinking about some of our earliest, we did many kind of prototypes before coming into a full kind of soundtrack. And some of the earlier ones were actually laying cassette tape into the book and creating these players that the reader could drag across the cassette tape and play in real time, creating the soundtrack in real time with the page. And I love that we tried it out, and it was so clear that although I still dream of that someday, this was not the project for that. It was very unreliable. It was a little bit noisy and difficult. But it's so, I just love that process. Like, I was thinking about how important it was to me to share with an audience, like, the way this came about was so kind of magical.
Yeah. Well, what specifically, in those long talks, or what, what cued you, or what brought you into being excited about joining the project, and bringing your music to it?
I think I was so interested in, there's such a sonic part of water. I think for me, water is more sound than anything else. Like, there's a moment, I wonder if everybody heard it, but there's a moment when you hear the sound of the bath, and I aligned it both in the book and in tonight with the text where you're talking about your daughter in the bath. Mm-hmm. And every time I hear that recording of bath water, it's so clear. Everything, the experience of that water is so clear to me. The memory of bath is so clear. Mm-hmm. It just seems so obvious to me that it needed a soundtrack. Yeah. And your willingness to use the tape machine was so exciting to me, because there's some things that are fundamental to that instrument. So what you saw me playing is like a live looper. So I'm singing live into one section, and then I'm having a playback head on either side. And there's this detuning that happens, which is very much like sound waves through water detune because of the movement of the water itself. And there's a way that we understand water as kind of changing sound waves, but also similar to sound movement through water is quite interesting in itself. So I just felt like it was a very perfect, like, congruence of both something that made so much sense to me for needing sound, and also a great experiment for what the sound can offer to the book. I was really thinking that about, how we could work together to create this object that people are really looking at, but how the sound can be a help in getting people into the material and staying with the material, and the idea of what time offers, what a time art offers to a kind of fixed media art.
Mm-hmm. It really, the idea of time and pacing. I mean, we talked a lot about pacing, and it's something that when I'm making a book, I think about, subconsciously in terms of where I want people to go, but not. I think about it when I'm creating it, but maybe not once the book is out there. And so I think one, beautiful learning experience for me was this element of music and timing, because it is so time-based, the art of music, and when elements come in and out, and then how that, like you said, grounds people in the book, and kind of, like an ebb and flow of, brings them in and brings them out as they're reading the text or looking at the images.
Yeah. I keep thinking about, we had some early meetings with the other collaborator, Deborah Sibony, and she was very concerned that there might be too much text, that the text in the sound, in the musical element, would be distracting. And I really took that to heart. I felt like that was really some great input, and one of the reasons I love collaboration. And so there was a way of really thinking about making sure that there was space between text. And so in the soundtrack, you could kind of hear this tonight in the pre-recorded elements, but there's these musical, these water interludes that happen between the music. So you have just water sounds and kind of space without text that I think balances quite well. So although it's about a 50-minute soundtrack, there's probably about 30 minutes of composed music, or 35 minutes, and maybe 15 minutes interspersed with these water sounds. So you get this kind of both the real and the musical in there. But tell me, so the text is quite interesting because it has these different layers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, this kind of hits at the process of creating an artist's book, or at least this book that I can speak to a little bit. But as I mentioned, I've been throwing around, these ideas, this desire to want to make this book for some time, and so I'd been collecting, researching other writings about water, historical, and scientific facts about water, and then also my own musings or poetry or narrative, however you call it, journal entries, memories of water. And so I had been collecting them all in bits and pieces. And when Anne and Deb, our other collaborator, when we all agreed, yes, we're going to make this book, there was, probably hundreds of pages of collaborative Google Docs about where we wanted to go with it, and I called it like my vomit on a page, if you will. I put all my words and everything in these long Google Docs, and then slowly the three of us started to hone in on a couple different directions that the book could go. I think there were 4 different kind of thematic structures, and then we narrowed it to one direction. And in that direction, what came out was these 3 voices and this desire to synthesize the voice of water with the different voices that you hear and read in the book. And so one voice was the facts, just scientific data about water, and then one voice was kind of this, like, sometimes I called it the ideal, or this Mother Earth voice, that's kind of like guiding, the ethereal kind of guiding you voice. And then there were the stories that I had written that were very personal, direct experiences and memories with water. And so it became clear that that's the text that we were going to work with. But then the challenge was, as Anne recalled, and Deb, everyone was like, whoa, this is a lot of text. And how to weave it together in a way that made sense. And so it kind of started out in one of these Google Docs is just, color coding the different voices, and then moving the bits around, or the different interludes or segments until they were really, woven together in this way where you could come in and out at different points. And, the book is intended, to page through linearly because there's a movement and a structure, but you could, delve into any signature, any spread, and read it, and it works as its own, similar. And so I'll let you speak to how you made the music in a similar way, right?
Well, I was thinking that the music is primarily the kind of Mother Earth voice. I always thought of it as like the sacred voice. And those in the book are embossed.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you could see that in the book, but they're actually something that would be tactile. So if the reader was putting their hand over it, they would feel it. Not so much, maybe they wouldn't even see it as clearly, but they would feel it, and they're hearing it in the soundtrack. So it's all of that text is somewhere within the lyrics of the soundtrack. And then what you heard tonight had Camden speaking some of these other texts, but those actually aren't on the soundtrack. Those texts are just meant to be read. So she would be like your voice in your mind reading that as it went across. But and then everything has kind of a different placement on the page. So the facts have these very small,
like a translucent paper that's kind of situated within the embossed or the blind printed, or voice of the sacred, if you will. And then there's it's not quite blind. It's very, very pale blue, but a watered pattern that goes between. And then when you turn from that, so you may have only seen them as white expanses on your screen because it was hard to get the lighting to show the texture. But then when you turn to Deb's beautiful prints, you have this waterscape, and then within that, on a semi-translucent paper, are the stories, the memories that are kind of embedded, within. And so you come into the image, and then as Anne noted, like your voice, you would read these stories, and then and you have to manipulate it. So it's bringing you in and engaging you with the actual print, which is not something that it normally happens. I mean, and Deb's prints are, totally beautiful, and we all have, paintings and prints that hang on walls are beautiful. But when are you? That's again going back to why I love book arts. When are you able to touch and hold and manipulate these prints? And it, yeah.
Well, and one of the things I was so excited about tonight was that we could do it together, so that the book was actually being displayed in time with the sound, because it's really the way I conceived of the sound, that the sound is really functional, that it is allowing somebody to kind of stay with maybe a page longer than they would. Like I wanted to show also, we have these, we had to think about, how do we want the audience engaging with the soundtrack? Should they have it on a phone? But then what if they don't have their phone? But we found these great speakers that can put in a chip with the soundtrack in it, so no wires, they can just wear their headphones. And this idea of having kind of an accompaniment, I think this way of even working on it, I had this love of going through the files. So I had the images in PDF, but going through the soundtrack and making sure that it seemed to pace well with moving through the images. And now also that these water interludes would somehow reinforce where they could be in the book. I really enjoyed the process of kind of thinking about how a reader might engage with it.
Yeah.
It was really fun.
Well, and it really is. I mean, artist books in general, or at least the way I end up making them, they take a really long time, and they're very iterative process, a really immersive process. But in our collaborations, we had so many meetings, and since the book started before the pandemic, it got held up a little bit, but then most of our meetings ended up taking place outside in driveways. Or with studio doors open, and there were so many considerations which I really enjoyed too, because I had not had to think before about music and how that would come in. And then of course Deb's role. I mean, we did so many experiments with what did we want the prints to be? Did we experimented printing, making images directly at water sources. Deb traveled to a few. I did it on some of my trips. And then, photography, we probably had, 500 images, and how to weave those in. And eventually we ended up with a lot of what you saw were Deb's beautiful cyanotype images and some of her watercolor work. And so just witnessing how those evolved as the music evolved too, because at some of our meetings, and Anne would come and bring her laptop and play some of the things. So I'd be looking at paper and looking at the image and thinking about all those things. So it really it just, all the elements, it was a true collaboration from start to end, which was, it still is.
Yeah, it is. And I think about how great it was to get that feedback. I mean, I was thinking there were some times when I was like, well, that's kind of too loud, or that's maybe not the right feeling. And there's something I really love about the collaborative process in that way, where, the music is of service. I think that's something I really enjoy in these kinds of multimedia projects, and thinking about what is the role of each element. But I know I also wanted to invite you to talk about how people can see the book.
Yeah. So really the point of artist books, as I mentioned earlier, is to not just look at them in the, on the screen, and not be, you need to touch and feel and interact. I was just watching an artist speak about his work, a book artist speak about his work earlier in the week. And he said, oftentimes artist books are put beneath vitrines, glass boxes, because of issues with, people touching them, even though all people should touch them. But and he said, well, I hate to see artist books like that. It's like seeing a person you love in a coffin, you can't. And it was really true. So anyway, we do not want this book to be in a coffin for any of you. It is going to be in an exhibit called Reclamation that's going to be at the San Francisco Public Library and the San Francisco Center for the Book this summer. June through September, and there's an artist exhibit, let's see, on June 4th, Friday, June 4th. It's going to be online, so you can see the other books in the show online too, but you can make, there will be details on their websites, but I know at the Center for the Book, you can make appointments to go see the show in person. And then hoping that once this pandemic passes and that everybody's vaccinated, the Codex International Book Fair is something that happens every 2 years at the Cranway Pavilion in Richmond, which is not far from here, right on the water. And we will have a table there. It will be exhibiting, and that usually happens in February. So that would be February of 2022. Yeah, 2022. So I hope that you will jot down that information somewhere if you're interested in the book and come see it, or if you're local, email me and I'll show it to you.
Anne,
I just wanted to jump in and say how wonderful that was, and thank you for taking the time to explain everything too afterwards, because I don't think I had any idea what book art was before this. So feeling really excited that I got to hear it live in person. I wanted to just read you a couple comments from people that were listening to this video online. Somebody said, that was lovely, I am relaxed now. And somebody else typed, magical images, music and voice weaving together. So wonderful to hear your amazing voice and composition again, Anne. Thank you both for creating this experience. So had some very nice comments during your playing. I was wondering if the idea of Zoom played into this, because I thought it worked really well over Zoom to see the side by side, and if you're thinking about future performances live in person, will it be something that might be video projected, or are there other settings that might be great to perform it in?
Well, I'm going to say my mini dreams on the musical side. So I do think I am so excited about how well this worked. I will say we're still in the learning phases with doing something like this on Zoom, and there are a lot of things to consider in terms of getting the right angle and the right amount of just the quality of a photo and the quality of sound. Right. But I think one thing that I'm so inspired by is I have to say that Camden's text is gorgeous, and I have this dream of setting some of the pieces for treble chorus and doing a suite, because there's beautiful repertoire about nature. There isn't a lot of repertoire around environmental concern, although I do think that is something that interests so many young people, and so I think it could be a beautiful part of a new repertoire for chorus. And I could see us showing this more. I think I just think the work is beautiful, and I love that there's a way that we can live in this kind of middle ground between it being like the venue that a book normally gets and the venue that music normally gets, and kind of thinking about how to use both those venues, kind of expand.
I mean, I think it's hard to think about. I mean, I'm not a performer, which I kept saying to Anne, like, oh God, I'm so nervous. This is a performance. I don't do this. But I think really extrapolating the book form, and how can that become something even in a live setting, like a live performance setting. Could you have pieces that people are listening to this performance around them while turning pages? I mean, that's something that we talked about with the book, that this physicality to it, because oftentimes when you listen to music, you're sitting, right?
Yep.
And so but I think that there's no end to the projects.
There are, but we also talked about ways of engaging younger people in this topic of this idea of what is our relationship to water, understanding, the environmental concerns and the history, and kind of giving them room to write their own stories around water. There's so much room that I feel that both the subject and this exact the book as substance and the music. There's so much room to grow it and to see where it leads.
So does that mean that you will be together, the three of you collaborating further on this project then? Most likely, hopefully. No pressure.
I think I'm going to say that I still feel like there's some, although the book is finished, I think the plan is to make 15.
Yeah, so there's a lot of production left on the printmaker Deb and myself to finish that. So that's kind of our immediate goal. But
well, I'm still picking at the music as my usual self. So, but I am really excited about. I feel like it's hard to envision past that, but I think I am excited to see the response to the book also. I feel like I think in COVID time it's felt like everything's so private, and it has made me realize how much I appreciate the interactivity of performance and the ability to try things and kind of have that kind of collaboration with an audience. So this has been great.
Yes, thank you so much for the opportunity. It's been really wonderful.
Yeah.
Of course. I mean, that was part of the reason why I wanted to create this series so many years ago, was that I thought we need something in between, right? We want to prepare as performers, and we like playing in big venues too. But we need a little in between, playing for our family and then playing at a big venue. And it's nice to have, back when I was doing these in person, of course, people would come to the apartment and just hang out and have some snacks afterwards and get to know each other. And so it was a real way to I think also foster some collaboration and friendships and meet new people. And but this now that it's online, people can tune in from different time zones. People can go back and listen tomorrow if they want. I mean, that's a really wonderful thing. So I'm hoping that I can continue to do the live streaming even when we go back to in person. That's working out the logistics, but that would be a nice thing to be able to offer. And let me just check if there's any more comments or questions. It doesn't look like so. If you two don't mind, I was just going to read about the next upcoming one so people listening can know. And speaking of the written word, actually, it's a writer next month, May 14th. And actually, this writer, Nicola Waldron, she was one of my high school English teachers. And we've stayed in touch all these years. And for all you listening there at home or wherever, I'm just going to read you a little bit about Nicola. Nicola Waldron is a writer whose recent work focuses on linking word to practices of mindfulness and deep consciousness. She'll read some poems and short prose pieces from her latest manuscript. Pour yourself a cup of tea, find a comfortable, quiet space to listen along, and you can join her newsletter online. There's a link on my website, and read her poems, essays, and reviews at various venues on the web. And she lives in South Carolina, so she'll be coming to us from the East Coast. And also for everyone listening, you can always check out my website, the Vernon Salon series link, and there should be information on the YouTube video right now. I've gone ahead and linked Anne and Camden's websites as well. So if anybody has any extra questions for them, wants to check out their work more, that would be great. And anything else that I missed?
No.
Thank you.
I feel like this is such, I mean, the pacing of it, you both talked a little bit about the pacing at one point, and to me that was that's what I took away from this the most. It was like the pacing just slowed everything down, and it actually made me focus more, and just I felt like I breathed more slowly. I just could take it all in a different way that maybe I wouldn't in a different setting or situation. So
yeah, I
really
shared an early talk with a friend, and she said, "It's the first music in a long time that hasn't grabbed at me. It's like you're isn't forcing me to listen. I get to choose, and I feel like it put her at ease." And I thought that was perfect. That's exactly what I want, so that somebody could be in the book
Right,
and not have to choose where they put their attention.
right, right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both so much. This has been such a pleasure, and I think we might sign off from the YouTube live. Just a couple more comments as we're finishing here. Water is such a grounding force, I believe, draws humans to it. That was beautiful. I'm happy to say at my age, I am learning something new. What a beautiful book, Camden. Even its packaging is thoughtful. So you had some. I think these comments should be saved too if you want to go back and read through them. But I think we will say goodnight for YouTube for now. And oh, sorry, Camden. Go
I
ahead.
didn't give credit. The packaging was designed with a friend of mine, John Demerit, and I just want to give him credit too
Great.
for that.
Oh, great.
Collaborator here.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us this evening, and we'll catch you next time. So take care.
Bye.
Thanks, Anne.